The meeting room door closed just as my fingers brushed the handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see 7 silhouettes taking their seats around the table where my first blueprint had once been spread out. They were about to sign a $50 million contract for technology I created, and I wasn't invited. Just a few days later, all 7 of those people had submitted their resignations. Here's how it all started. My name is Claire Morgan, and at 29, I'd already lived through enough professional disappointments to last a lifetime. But this one hit different. I still remember the weight of my laptop bag against my shoulder as I walked through the sleek glass doors of Virion Technologies that Wednesday morning. The Denver sunrise painted the Rocky Mountains in soft orange hues behind the building, a stark contrast to the cold modernism of our headquarters. As a senior technical specialist, a title that sounded important but meant surprisingly little, I'd grown accustomed to the sterile hallways and muted conversations. What I hadn't grown accustomed to was being excluded from meetings about my own technology. The central conference room, with its wall-to-wall windows overlooking the city, was usually where I presented my work. Not today. Today, the blinds were half-drawn, and through the gaps, I could see the familiar navy suits and power postures of Virion's executive team. 7 of them, arranged like chess pieces around the mahogany table, with the CEO, Richard Mercer, at the head. He was smiling that smile, the one that appeared whenever money was about to change hands. Across from him sat a man I recognized instantly, even from behind, Jonathan Price, CEO of Kestrel Biotech, my first angel investor, my mentor, my friend, or so I'd thought. I reached for the door handle, only for it to be pulled away from me as Dean Carver, the vice president of strategy, stepped out. He closed the door behind him with practiced smoothness. "Claire," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're in early." "I'm always in early." "Dean, is that the Kestrel meeting? I should be in there. They're discussing my system." Dean straightened his already impeccable tie. At 45, he had the polished confidence of someone who'd spent more time in boardrooms than laboratories. "This is strictly C-suite, Claire. Strategic discussions, nothing technical." Through the glass, I could see my slides on the projection screen, my data, my algorithms, my 3 years of work, displayed in clean, corporate blue and white, with every trace of my name removed. "That's my presentation," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than a shout. Dean's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "It's company property, Claire. Remember your contract. Everything you develop here belongs to Virion." Of course I remembered. I'd signed it 18 months ago, when Virion acquired my startup, Quantum Health Analytics. I'd founded QHA straight out of graduate school, working out of my dad's garage in Boulder. 3 years of ramen noodles and sleepless nights later, I'd created an AI diagnostic system that could process medical data 40% faster than anything on the market. Virion had swooped in with a generous acquisition offer and promises of resources beyond my wildest dreams. They'd keep me on as the technical lead, they said. My vision would remain intact, they promised. What they didn't say was that they'd slowly edge me out of every important conversation. Jonathan Price specifically asked for me in the initial emails, I said, meeting Dean's gaze. "Things change. This is about big picture strategy now." Dean glanced at his watch. "Look, we need this deal to go through smoothly. Kestrel's $50 million contract will boost our quarterly numbers, and frankly, the board is getting antsy. Technical details can come later." Through the glass, I saw Jonathan gesture animatedly. He was asking questions. Technical questions, no doubt. Questions only I could answer properly. "They're selling him an incomplete version," I said, more to myself than to Dean. "They're selling him what he needs to know." Dean's tone had an edge now. "Claire, I respect your work, but this isn't your garage startup anymore. This is corporate strategy. Go back to your lab, do what you do best, and let us handle the business side." With that, he turned and re-entered the conference room, leaving me standing in the hallway, my reflection distorted in the glass. In that moment, Looking at my warped image, something crystallized in my mind. I wasn't being protected from boring meetings. I was being deliberately excluded from decisions about my own creation. I turned and walked not to my lab, but to the elevator. I'd spent 18 months trying to be a team player, trying to believe I could make a difference from within the system. But watching Jonathan, the man who'd once stayed up all night with me troubleshooting code over cold coffee and stale pizza, sit in that room while my work was misrepresented, something broke inside me. I went home. My apartment in downtown Denver was small, but mine. Unlike the sterile perfection of Virion's offices, it was chaotic in a way that made sense to me. Books stacked by topics rather than size. Whiteboards covered in equations. A collection of dead plants I kept meaning to replace. I went straight to my closet and pulled out the cardboard box I'd brought home the day Virion acquired QHA. The box I'd been too sentimental to throw away but too hurt to open, until now. Inside were the original blueprints for what would become Virion's most profitable medical diagnostic system. Handwritten notes on yellow legal pads. Emails printed and highlighted. A journal documenting every breakthrough and setback. And most importantly, conversations with Jonathan Price, including the napkin where he'd scribbled his first investment offer and signed his name. I spread everything across my living room floor, creating a timeline of my own intellectual journey. Then I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called Jonathan Price's personal number. It was 11:43 p.m. when he answered, his voice gruff with surprise. "Claire, is everything all right?" "No, Jonathan, it isn't," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "We need to talk about today's meeting." A pause. "I was wondering why you weren't there." "Were you? Because you didn't ask for me." Another pause. Longer this time. "I did, actually. Richard said you were working on the next phase and couldn't be pulled away." "Of course he did." I closed my eyes, took a breath, and opened them again, looking at the evidence spread before me. The presentation felt off. Jonathan continued, unexpected relief in his tone. "They couldn't answer basic questions about the algorithm's learning parameters. Dean kept saying the technical team would follow up." "There is no technical team, Jonathan. It's me. It's always been me." "What do you mean?" "I mean they're selling you a system they don't understand. They're promising capabilities they can't deliver without me. And they're doing it because they know once you sign, you'll be too invested to back out when things don't work as promised." "That's a serious accusation, Claire." "It is, and I can back it up." I picked up one of the documents from the floor, my original contract with Virion. "There's a clause in my acquisition agreement, Section 17B. It gives me intervention rights if the technology is misrepresented or applied in ways that violate its intended purpose." I wasn't aware of that. "Neither are they, apparently." I took a deep breath. "Jonathan, do you remember when we first met? When I showed you the prototype in my dad's garage?" A soft chuckle came through the phone. "How could I forget? You had those ridiculous string lights hanging from the ceiling because the overhead light was broken. And you said something I never forgot. You said, 'I'm not investing in a product. I'm investing in the mind that created it.'" Silence filled the line, but it wasn't empty. It was loaded with recognition. "Send me everything," he finally said. "Every document, every proof of your claims. I want to see it all." I stayed up until 3 a.m., scanning and emailing every piece of evidence I had. The original blueprints, the acquisition contract with the intervention clause highlighted, my journal entries documenting how I'd been gradually pushed out of strategic conversations, early emails where Jonathan himself had acknowledged my sole authorship of the core technology. At 4:12 a.m., my phone rang. "I've read it all," Jonathan said, his voice now fully alert despite the hour. "The deal's off." My heart skipped. Just like that. Just like that. But I'm not stopping there. I'm proposing a $15 million seed investment for you to restart, on your own terms. Full control. Majority ownership. With Kestrel as a strategic partner, not an owner. I sat down hard on my couch, the implications washing over me. "You'd do that?" "Claire." I made a mistake letting you sell to Virion. I should have protected you better. This is me making it right. By 9 a.m. the next morning, I'd received a preliminary investment term sheet in my email. By noon, I had a name for my new company, NovaFold Systems. By 2 p.m., I'd sent my resignation letter to Virion's HR department, effective immediately. I didn't hear anything from Virion that day. Nothing. Not even an acknowledgement of my resignation. The silence was deafening, but telling. The following morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Calls from unknown numbers. Texts from former colleagues. Emails from Virion executives, including Dean Carver, all marked urgent. I ignored them all, focusing instead on setting up temporary office space in a co-working facility downtown. Jonathan had moved with surprising speed, transferring the first funding installment by wire that morning. At 11:23 a.m., my phone rang with a call I decided to take. Claire Morgan. My voice sounded different to my own ears, stronger, somehow. Claire, it's Dean. We need to talk. The smooth confidence was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. I don't work for Virion anymore. Dean, my resignation was effective immediately. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. Jonathan Price has pulled out of the deal, claiming misrepresentation of technical capabilities. He's demanding verification of authorship for every aspect of the system. I smiled to myself. That sounds like a you problem, Dean. He mentioned your name specifically. Said you're the only one who can properly explain how the core algorithm functions. A pause. Claire, this is a $50 million deal. The board is breathing down our necks. We need you to come in and help us salvage this. I can't do that. We'll credit you properly this time. Full acknowledgement of your work, a promotion, a raise, whatever you want. I've already accepted a position elsewhere. The silence on the other end was profound. Where? He finally asked. I've started my own company again, with Jonathan Price's backing. Another long silence. When Dean spoke again, his voice had dropped to a near whisper. You planned this. No, Dean. You planned this when you shut that door in my face. I'm just responding accordingly. I ended the call and turned back to my laptop, where I was setting up the framework for NovaFold's first official day of business. My phone continued to buzz with messages from increasingly senior Virion executives, but I let them all go to voicemail. That evening, as I was about to leave the co-working space, I received a text from Marina, a data scientist I'd worked closely with at Virion. Board called emergency meeting, independent auditors coming in tomorrow to verify IP ownership, everyone's pointing fingers. 7 resignation letters submitted so far, including Richard and Dean. What did you do? I didn't respond, but I saved the message, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. By the end of the week, the story had spread throughout Denver's tech community. Virion's stock had dropped 17% on news of the failed Kestrel deal and the executive exodus. Meanwhile, NovaFold Systems had already attracted interest from 3 major healthcare providers, all former contacts who'd followed my work. 1 month later, we secured a $220 million contract with Greenstream Energy, a sustainable energy corporation looking to apply our diagnostic AI to power grid optimization. The contract was more than 4 times the size of the Kestrel deal Virion had lost. I built NovaFold differently from the ground up. Every team member, now numbering 43, had proper credit for their contributions. Our company documents explicitly protected intellectual property rights, even within the organization. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword, it was built into our operating model. 6 months after that fateful morning, as I was reviewing applications for our expanded AI research division, a LinkedIn notification appeared on my phone. Dean Carver had sent me a connection request. His profile now listed him as a strategic consultant rather than Virion's VP of strategy. His message read, Claire, I've learned valuable lessons. Would love to reconnect and discuss potential collaboration opportunities. I declined the request without a response. The truth is, I never set out for revenge. I didn't plot to bring down Virion's executive team or to see Dean Carver humbled. I simply refused to be erased from my own story. When they closed that door on me, they didn't realize they were giving me the push I needed to open a much bigger one for myself. Some people might see this as a cautionary tale about corporate greed or the dangers of selling your startup too soon, but I see it differently. To me, it's about remembering your worth when others try to diminish it. About standing firm when the easier path would be to bend. You don't need to destroy others to get justice. You just need to build something undeniably yours. And never, ever let them close the door on you again. The meeting room door had closed just as my fingers brushed the handle that Wednesday morning. But by doing so, they had inadvertently opened a path to something far greater than I could have imagined. Sometimes exclusion isn't rejection, it's redirection. When I look back at that moment now, standing in the hallway with my distorted reflection staring back at me from the glass, I don't see failure. I see the exact moment I reclaimed my power. The 7 executives who thought they could erase me from my own creation ended up erasing themselves instead. Not because I sought vengeance, but because truth has a way of demanding recognition. They resigned not because of what I did, but because of what they had done. And that makes all the difference. I now understand that my story truly began the moment that door closed. It was the first day of the rest of my career, a career built on my terms, with my name proudly attached to every innovation that bears my fingerprints. A career where doors don't close in my face because I own the building. That morning in the Virion hallway wasn't the end of my journey. It was barely the beginning. The Denver tech scene is relatively small. Word travels fast when 7 executives resign simultaneously. Even faster when a new company emerges from the ashes and secures a contract worth hundreds of millions. I've become something of a legend, though that was never my intention. Young engineers approach me at conferences, eyes wide with admiration. "You're Claire Morgan," they say, as if the name itself carries power. Perhaps it does now. Venture capitalists who once overlooked my emails now send meeting requests that I deliberately take my time answering. Not out of spite, but because I've learned the value of careful consideration, of knowing exactly what I'm worth. Jonathan Price and I have weekly strategy calls, but our relationship has evolved. He's no longer the mentor and I the protege. We're equals, partners in the truest sense of the word. He often jokes that backing me was the best decision he ever made twice. Last month, I returned to my dad's garage in Boulder. It looks smaller now. The concrete floor still stained with coffee spills from those early days of frantic coding. I sat on the same folding chair I'd used when building the first prototype and tried to remember who I was then. Hungry, determined, naive in some ways, but fiercely protective of my vision. That core hasn't changed, even as everything around it has. Marina left Virion 3 months after I did. She's now NovaFold's Director of Data Science, leading a team of 12. When I offered her the position, she asked why I'd want someone who hadn't stood up for me when it mattered. "Because you told me the truth when it was easier to stay silent," I answered. "And because talent shouldn't be punished for management's failures." The remaining executives at Virion tried to rebuild after the mass exodus, bringing in new leadership and rebranding their approach. They even issued a public statement acknowledging past oversights and properly crediting the innovative work of former team members. They never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew. The medical diagnostic system they'd been so eager to sell to Kestrel? It still works, but without my ongoing development, it's becoming obsolete. Their attempts to reverse engineer my planned upgrades have fallen short. You can copy code, but you can't copy the mind behind it. Dean Carver eventually found a position at a smaller firm across town. We occasionally end up at the same industry events. And he always makes a point of acknowledging me from across the room with a tight nod. I return the courtesy with a smile that's neither vengeful nor forgiving, just professional. Richard Mercer, Virion's former CEO, retired early and moved to Arizona. The official story was that he wanted to focus on his golf game. The unofficial story, whispered at networking events, was that the board had given him an ultimatum after the Kestrel debacle: resign or be fired. I don't take pleasure in their downfall. What I take pleasure in is walking into NovaFold's headquarters each morning, seeing our values emblazoned on the wall. innovation, integrity, recognition. That last one matters most to me. Every patent we file lists every contributor, no matter how small their input. Every presentation includes the names and photos of team members who helped develop the technology being discussed. Every contract we sign includes clauses protecting individual intellectual contributions. We've turned down partnerships with companies that balked at these requirements. That's just not how things are done, they say. That's exactly why we're doing it differently, I reply. The industry is watching, some with skepticism, others with interest, a few with hope. Can a tech company succeed while putting people before profit? Can transparency and proper credit coexist with market dominance? So far, the answer is a resounding yes. Last week, a journalist from Tech Innovator magazine sat across from me in my office, recording our conversation for a cover story. "What would you say to the executives who tried to shut you out?" she asked. I considered the question carefully, looking out my window at the same rocky mountains I used to admire from Virion's hallways. The view is different now, clearer somehow. "I'd thank them," I finally said. The journalist's eyebrows shot up. "Thank them? After what they did?" "Yes, because their actions taught me something valuable. Doors only keep you out if you accept that they should remain closed." She nodded slowly, jotting something in her notebook. "And what about young entrepreneurs facing similar situations? What advice would you give them?" "Document everything," I said without hesitation. "Keep records of your contributions. Know what you've signed, and most importantly, remember that your worth isn't determined by a title or a corner office. It's in what you create and how you create it." After she left, I stayed at my desk, thinking about how far I'd come from that moment in the hallway, about how different things might have been if Dean had simply opened the door and invited me in. But he didn't, and here we are. The interesting thing about closed doors is that they often lead us to open windows we might never have noticed otherwise. Windows that offer broader views and fresher air. Windows that, sometimes, lead to something far better than whatever waited on the other side of that door. I don't know what the future holds for NovaFold systems. The tech landscape changes rapidly, and today's innovations become tomorrow's obsolete systems with alarming speed. But I do know this: whatever we build, we'll build it together, with every contributor's name attached to their work. And no one will ever stand in a hallway, watching through frosted glass as their creation is presented without them. Not on my watch. Not in my company. Not ever again. It's been exactly 1 year since that meeting room door closed in my face. 1 year since I stood in that hallway, watching my distorted reflection and making a decision that would change everything. Today, I'm hosting a different kind of meeting. Around our conference table sits my core team, along with representatives from 3 international healthcare organizations. We're discussing the global rollout of our latest diagnostic system, one that builds on my original vision but has been enhanced by the collective brilliance of every person in this room. The door to this conference room is made of clear glass. No frosting, no barriers, no distortion. It's a small detail, but a meaningful one. When the meeting concludes, contracts signed and hands shaken, Jonathan pulls me aside. "1 year," he says with a smile. "Who would have thought that closed door would lead to all this?" I look around at what we've built, not just the technology or the company, but the culture. The sense of ownership that radiates from every team member. "I think I always knew," I tell him. "I just needed a push to stop accepting closed doors as my fate." He nods, understanding. "So what's next for Claire Morgan?" I smile, thinking of the research projects currently underway in our labs, the partnerships forming with universities, the mentorship program I've established for young women in STEM. I'm not entirely sure, I admit, but whatever it is, I'll make sure my name is on it. And that, after all, is the point. Not fame or fortune or even revenge. Just recognition, just truth, just the simple acknowledgement that we all deserve credit for what we create. 7 executives once thought they could shut me out of a meeting about my own technology. They didn't realize they were setting in motion events that would lead to their own departures and my greatest success. I didn't set out to make them resign. I simply refused to remain invisible. Sometimes that's enough to change everything. When people ask me what happened, I tell them the truth. A door closed and I opened a window. The rest, as they say, is history. My history, with my name on it, as it should be. I received another LinkedIn request last week, this one from Richard Mercer, Virion's former CEO. His message was brief: impressive work with Novafold. Perhaps we could discuss lessons learned over coffee. I considered it for a moment before declining, not out of bitterness, but because some chapters are better left closed. Some lessons don't need further discussion. They simply need to be applied moving forward. Besides, I'm too busy opening new doors to revisit the ones that once closed in my face. That's the thing about success. It's not about getting even. It's about getting ahead. It's about building something so undeniably valuable that those who once dismissed you can't ignore your impact. Do I still think about that morning sometimes? The frosted glass? The silhouettes? The weight of exclusion? Of course, it was a pivotal moment, but it no longer carries pain. Just perspective. My dad called yesterday after reading the Tech Innovator article. "I always knew you'd make it," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Even back when you were working in my garage, tripping the circuit breaker every other day." "You never doubted me," I replied. "Never had reason to. You've always known your worth, Claire, even when others didn't see it." That's what it comes down to. In the end, knowing your worth, refusing to let others define it for you, standing firm when the winds of corporate politics try to blow you aside. The 7 executives who resigned did so because, when confronted with the truth, they couldn't defend their actions. They'd built their strategy on erasing me, only to discover I wouldn't be erased. I didn't make them resign. Their own choices did that. Just as my choices led me here, to this office, to this company, to this life I've built from the fragments of what was once taken from me. The view from my window shows Denver's skyline, including the Virion building in the distance. It's a daily reminder not of what I lost, but of what I gained by walking away, by refusing to accept less than I deserved. Novafold is now valued at over $500 million, with projections to hit the billion-dollar mark within 3 years. We've expanded into 4 countries and grown to over 200 employees. Each one knows their contributions matter. Each one has their name attached to their work. It's a simple concept, really. Give credit where it's due. Acknowledge the human beings behind the innovation. Treat intellectual property not just as a corporate asset, but as a reflection of individual brilliance, worthy of recognition. That morning, standing in the hallway outside the conference room, I never could have imagined where the path would lead, how shutting me out of one meeting would ultimately open so many more doors. Life is funny that way. The moments that feel like endings often turn out to be beginnings in disguise. So if you ever find yourself on the wrong side of a closed door, watching through frosted glass as others take credit for your work, remember this: you have options. You can knock politely and hope to be let in. You can walk away and find another door. Or you can build your own house with your own doors that open and close according to your own values. I chose the third option, and I've never once regretted it. Not even for a moment. The meeting room door closed just as my fingers brushed the handle, but in doing so, it opened something far more valuable: my eyes to what I truly deserved, and my mind to what I could build on my own terms. 7 executives thought they could erase me from my own story. Instead, they wrote themselves out of it entirely. And I began a new chapter, one where my name appears on every page, in permanent ink, exactly as it should be. Claire Morgan, founder, innovator, and author of my own destiny. Just as we all should be.